Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Wednesday, the 6th of November. Working our way through the prophet Hosea, we come to chapter 12 today, God speaking judgment against the nation of Israel. And in verse 7 we read, "The merchant uses dishonest scales and loves to defraud. Ephraim boasts, 'I am very rich. I have become wealthy. With all my wealth, they will not find in me any iniquity or sin.'" And so the nation was doing well. We need to remember that they weren't falling into poverty. They were falling away from God. They were falling into idolatry and all sorts of other sinfulness. It wasn't a question of possessions. They had plenty, but they were losing God. And that's where the judgment came from. And this is clear because a few verses later in verse 14 we read, "But Ephraim has aroused his bitter anger. His Lord will leave on him the guilt of his bloodshed and will repay him for his contempt." So even though Ephraim, the nation, might have thought, with all my wealth, they're not going to find anything wrong in me. I'm doing well. I haven't done anything bad. God says, no, you have. And it will hold him accountable and they will be judged. And we know that that is indeed what happened. And the two things that come out of this, the one is to just remind ourselves that wealth is not necessarily a sign of God's blessing. Now, sometimes that is true. Certainly, Abraham was a wealthy man. Jacob went off to Laban with nothing and came back with great possessions. Likewise, David, a man after God's own heart, had plenty of material wealth. But not everybody did. And we need to remember that Jesus, when talking to people, said, "Foxes have holes and the birds have their nests. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." He had no house. He owned virtually nothing. When they came to dividing up his property, it was the clothes he was wearing. So if we're following Jesus, we need to recognize that sometimes poverty goes together with righteous godliness. And so we need to be wary when people think and proclaim material possessions are synonymous with blessing. That's not true. And the second challenge we face is when we do have material blessings, how did we get them? And there's nothing wrong with making money and producing and becoming wealthy. That's absolutely fine. But how do we do it? And the judgment was that they were using dishonest scales and defrauding. And God will never bless dishonesty. When we're making money in deceitful ways, if we're becoming wealthy through ungodly means, that wealth is not a sign of blessing, but a sign of the fruits of our sinfulness. And so we need to make sure that we're walking with God, that we're doing and living our lives and doing our business and everything that we do, we're doing it in God's way and for God's glory. And if we have wealth, we live generously with it. If we haven't got wealth, we recognize that's not a sign that God isn't with us. So be encouraged to know that God loves everybody. He looks after everybody. But people with wealth have an extra challenge to use that wealth in godly ways and for God's glory. So be encouraged, be challenged, be blessed.